Released in 1994, The Crow is a dark fantasy action film based on the comic by James O'Barr. The story follows Eric Draven, a rock musician who is brutally murdered along with his fiancée. A year later, a mystical crow resurrects Eric, giving him supernatural abilities to seek vengeance against those responsible for their deaths. It is a cult favorite and did very well at the box office, but The Crow is often remembered for the tragedies that occurred behind the scenes. Tragedies so devastating and so eerie, the film is largely considered cursed. With the remake upon us, and yes, I know it's not exactly garnering a warm welcome, but I thought it would be interesting to dive into the original film's production because madness isn't the word. It is absolute insanity. I knew about Brandon Lee's passing. I did not know about everything that went with it. I love how one video ago I was saying like, oh no, don't expect dark stuff. I don't do dark stuff. I do the evolution of hot dog eating contests. That being said, it is more of a darker video. So here we go. Many of us are aware that The Crow is most known for the death of Brandon Lee, son of the legendary martial artist Bruce Lee. That was definitely, of course, the most tragic thing to happen on set, but you'd be surprised just how many accidents and eerie parallels were involved in the production of The Crow. I got a lot of information from the book The Crow, the story behind the film by Bridget Bass. I believe that's how you pronounce her last name. Let me tell you, it was very helpful, but my God, I had to move mountains to get this book, and I had to then carry Madame Zeroni up those mountains. I was very determined to get this book in any way, shape, or form. I checked local libraries. Nothing. I was like, oh, okay, maybe it's just like not that popular. No problem, I'll just buy it. Don't I go online and see that used paperbacks of this book are going for like $200, $300, $400. So that wasn't happening. The Kindle version is $20, but still, that's a lot of money for a Kindle version. If you see this book at a flea market or a thrift store, snag it, get yourself a payday, or have like a rare book in your collection. Anyways, the author in this book, she does various interviews with different people that were involved with the film. The madness started before cameras were even rolling. When they were setting up production offices, there was a voicemail left on the office phone giving a warning that said, do not make this film. Bad things will happen. Creepy, but you know, whatever at that point. There's no talk of a curse. It could just be a prank call, perhaps. Regardless, very weird. Let's fast forward to the first day of filming. The backlot was soaked with fake rain. Mind you, this is North Carolina. I know that's a southern state in the United States, but it gets very cold there, I promise you. During this film, I believe they said it was about 17 degrees Fahrenheit, which I think equates to -8 degrees Celsius. It was to the point where they were putting alcohol in the water so that it wouldn't freeze throughout the night. And on the topic of night, The Crow was exclusively night shoots. Yes, of course, outdoor shots should be nighttime, but from what I've gathered, this is not a common practice to do 100% of the time. There is really no need to shoot outside during indoor shots, but alas, The Crow still did those shots at night. Because this wasn't super common, the cast and crew were a bit confused, but they chalked it up to being like a vibey aesthetic thing. And that could have been the case, but it also could have been a money thing. Switching from a night to a day shoot costs you that entire day in between. And when you are filming a movie, every second counts. It is very expensive to lose an entire day. Whatever the reason, The Crow had very long night shoots. We're talking 14, 16, 18-hour days, 6 days a week for many people involved in the film. It is important to note that this was like a non-union situation, so there really weren't many regulations, if any at all.
Are the working conditions on the set of The Crow particularly bad?
Extremely long hours, 18-hour days back to back at times, pushing 90 to 100 hours a week, 6-day weeks was way too much.
Do you think that overwork, that exhaustion might have resulted in this accident?
Safety precautions, all of them were definitely not followed. It could have been prevented with better management.
Many members of the cast and crew were sick and exhausted and miserable, except Brandon. He would be soaked and freezing while the crew was in full winter garb and never had a complaint. He was just stoked to be there, stoked to be a part of this film, and had a great sense of humor. He was a total goofball. And he was super method too. He figured that when somebody came back to life, they would be cold, they would be shivering, and he wanted to explore that. So Brandon decided that he wanted to be packed in ice. Like, went to the liquor store, bought all the ice they had in stock, and like poured it into a tub, I would imagine, and he just laid in it. Once he was shivering, freezing, he would get up, notice his facial expressions, notice how he was feeling when he was walking, and then utilize that in his role. He wasn't always sunshine and good times. At the beginning of his career, the directors who worked with him said he was a spoiled brat with an identity crisis, which is totally understandable with who his father was. Regardless, a couple of years later, these directors changed their tune. They said Brandon did a complete 180, so obviously he got serious about his work. Brandon was a great athlete as well, which was crucial for this role. The character Eric is incredibly strong, and in the comics, he's doing tumbling and pirouettes. Brandon was absolutely perfect for this opportunity. And if I'm not mistaken, I believe this role was only offered to him. I don't know if it was a miscommunication or if other actors were considered, but no offer was ever made. But either way, Brandon got the role, and he was really excited to do it. And as I mentioned, he was such a good sport about everything, and his excitement continued even through the bullshit. The first day of shooting was not only miserable because of the cold. There was a horrific accident on day one that sparked talk of the Crow being cursed. I'm gonna back up to a few days prior to the accident. There was a safety check of the back lot, and these large power poles that lined the fake streets drew some red flags. Again, this was nighttime, it was dark, and the concern was the trucks on set wouldn't be able to see the poles. More specifically, wouldn't be able to see the power lines connecting the poles. It's also critical to know that this back lot was built on the main power supply that was connected to the state capitol. That meant that these poles were carrying hundreds of thousands of volts. James Martitius was in the cage of a cherry picker truck. When the truck backed up, it did not see the power lines, and so the cage that James Martitius was in went straight into the high tension wire. This set the many layers of winter clothing he had on ablaze. So James was trapped in this cage. There's no room to stop, drop, and roll. The dude's like 6'2". He has nowhere to go. Once the grounds crew realized what was happening, they of course brought him down, but that still took 2 to 3 minutes. Thankfully, James survived, but he suffered second and third degree burns, over 80% of his body, and he had to have his ears removed.
Remember, they only shot at night, so night had fallen.
They were driving their pickup truck with a cherry picker.
He backed his cherry picker up into a live wire. He caught on fire.
It ended up hitting the high tension wire, high electric wire that would carry the voltage to run all the lights and the backlot set.
He was rushed to the hospital. He had second and third degree burns all over his body. He didn't die. He lost his ears. But it was a terrible tragedy. And then they had to start shooting.
After a long period of treatment and rehabilitation, he went right back to work and had a great sense of humor about the whole thing. James may have taken it in stride, but the North Carolina Occupational Health and Safety Division, not so much. They did investigate the incident, but no lawsuit was ever filed, and the only damage suffered really was bad press and a $9,500 fine. If you can believe it, that was not the only horrific thing to happen on the first day of filming. In a totally unrelated incident, a brand new equipment truck that belonged to a key grip went up in flames. Again, it was freezing outside, and the crew member that was inside the truck at the time decided decided to put a blanket up in an attempt to keep the cold out. Well, that blanket was later forgotten, and there was a light bulb on the door, and it ended up igniting that blanket. Thankfully, nobody was hurt, but a lot inside of that truck was damaged, and that's also just really scary to happen on set. Not long after that, there was a crew member who slipped and accidentally shoved a screwdriver through their hand, and a disgruntled sculptor drove his car through the studio plaster shop. Just as things started to calm down, Mother Nature said, no, hold my beer. A storm, I believe it was dubbed the storm of the century if I tracked the right storm, hit North Carolina around March 13th, 1993. I'm not sure, but I don't think this was technically a hurricane. I've seen it labeled as a superstorm, but winds hit over 100 miles per hour and destroyed the exterior sets. This set the film even further behind schedule than it already was. I also read that a stuntman fell through the roof of the set and broke multiple ribs, and one of the publicists for the film got into a pretty bad accident on their drive home or to a hotel, leaving the set. As you can imagine, this caused a very chaotic and very tense atmosphere. Ken Aldridge, a second unit camera operator, said, quote, "It was a dangerous mix of long hours, potentially life-threatening stunts, weapons or explosives combined with an overexhausted technician who was handling more than one or two at a time." Then, of course, there was the tragic death of Brandon Lee. I want to give context. I think that's super important when talking about this accident, so I am going to be giving as much background as I am able and to the very best of my knowledge. On March 30th, 1993, on day 47 out of 52 of filming, the most crucial scene in The Crow was to be filmed. The way the scene was originally supposed to go down was remembered differently by many different people. This was an improvised heavy writing environment. And I don't believe storyboards or anything like that were something utilized, so there's no way to know for sure what the original plan for the scene was. There was a lot of confusion on set, to say the very least. Surprising, I know. For example, Lance Anderson, the makeup artist on film, thought the original scene was Eric being stabbed and then shot once until falling to the ground and being shot several more times, and then tossed out of a window. Lance even constructed a harness that Eric would wear for this theme. He thought the knife was going to be thrown at Brandon. This was until the director, Alex Proyas, said no, he's only going to get shot.
Getting a rig that I had rigged for Brandon to wear, where a knife is thrown at him when he comes through the door, and I built a harness. They would throw the knife, and then the knife would be embedded in his chest. So I was down there getting that ready, and they told me they need me on set. And the director said, "We're changing that scene. He's going to come through the door, and he's going to get shot."
There was never any update on this revision in the script. The main takeaway here is there was lots of confusion on set, and Eric getting shot the way he was shot was sort of a last-minute change, but the plan always involved some sort of shooting. While in wardrobe, the wardrobe supervisor handed Lee a bulletproof vest. Now, according to Sophia Shinas, the actress who plays Shelley in the film, she claims that Brandon outright denied the vest. He did not want it to get in the way of the camera shot. He thought it would be too obvious. The wardrobe supervisor reassured him, telling him it absolutely would not be visible, but Brandon, again, said, no, I don't want it. If it's my time to go, it's my time to go. Now, again, that's according to Sophia Shinas. I mean, in retrospect, that's a bit dramatic, in my opinion. Maybe I'm just sour grapes, but And the wardrobe supervisor recalls none of that and insisted that everything on her end was prepared and that this scene didn't even require a bulletproof vest. And the stunt coordinator agreed with her. Whatever happened, no vest was worn. The only time a vest was ever worn was during the big shootout scene with Top Dollar. so Brandon clearly was not opposed to wearing the vest if it was needed. Brandon, despite all of the confusion and change, and while most certainly exhausted, remained upbeat. He was chatting about his fiancée and their wedding that was fast approaching on the 17th of April. He was just head over heels in love and so excited specifically about this Giorgio Armani suit he would be wearing. And that day, Brandon also brought up his father. Now, this was odd because he had never brought up his father on set and nobody brought it up to him. From what I understand, it seemed to be like an unspoken thing. Just don't bring up his dad. He's doing his own thing here. But on this day, he chose to open up. His optimism and light was much needed for the scene taking place that day. It was a flashback to when his fiancée is brutally attacked and killed. Then Eric would be murdered as well. This was a scene, specifically the gunshot, that was rehearsed quite a bit before cameras rolled. The focus for Brandon was how he would fall. It was safest for him to fall forward, and Brandon had that down pat. He knew how he needed to fall. Michael Massey also rehearsed the shooting with the stunt coordinator Jeff Amata, and Amata gave very clear instructions that many on set had heard, and they have gone on record to say so. He made it very clear, never point the gun at Brandon. Amata wanted to make sure that Massey was not confused in any way, so he said, "Where are you going to shoot?" Massey said, "That spot on the wall right there." Amata said, "This spot here," pointed to the spot, and Massey said, yes, that was the correct spot for him to be aiming at. So Michael Massey received clear instructions from the stunt coordinator, and Massey's response indicated that he fully understood. Now on Brandon's end, he would be holding a grocery bag, and behind this grocery bag was like a little hidden trigger that would detonate a squib. A squib is a small explosive charge. It's usually connected to a bag of blood. It would also normally be hidden inside of an actor's clothing, and someone from special effects would detonate it for them. The whole self-detonation thing that Brandon was doing, from what I have gathered, is quite abnormal. The idea is detonate the squib. At the same time, someone fires a prop gun that is loaded with blanks. The plan of action was set. The shot was going to be incredibly loud because the director wanted to see not only a realistic recoil from the weapon, but also some smoke and a flash of flame from the barrel. To get this effect, the blanks needed a full charge, the equivalent amount of gunpowder contained in a real bullet, with the bullet tip replaced by wadding. I want to clarify that this is totally fine and totally normal under regular circumstances. However, under these irregular circumstances, it was a major factor in the death of Brandon Lee. The scene was set up with Massey a very safe distance away for a blank. The cameras were finally ready to roll, so the prop master, David Kuttner, took the gun from Massey, opened the chamber, loaded a single full blank, closed the chamber, and handed it back to Massey. None of the rehearsals were done with blanks. So, action is called, the shot is fired, Brandon falls backwards. A few seconds after the director yelled cut, Brandon did not get up. Everyone thought that's fine, he's super into this character, he probably just needs a little extra time to gather himself before he stands up. A few more seconds pass, Brandon still hasn't moved. Now everyone's thinking, Brandon the goofball, just being funny, playing a prank. A few more seconds pass, Brandon still doesn't move, and everyone is now frozen. At this point, a medic did tend to him and treated it as if it was due to the fall. Because Brandon fell backwards, he thought it had something to do with like a spinal injury. Brandon was unresponsive and his pulse was degenerating rapidly. Still, the assumption was that this was some sort of spinal issue, mostly because there was no blood anywhere. Once the medic started taking off Brandon's clothes, he did see a hole through his t-shirt. It was 8 to 10 millimeters in diameter and 1 inch below his navel. The medic also noticed that there was no burn mark, which would indicate that the squib did some sort of harm to Brandon. At this point, Brandon stopped taking spontaneous breaths, so the medic gave him a tracheotomy to give him some chance of living. After several minutes, the ambulance arrived and rushed Brandon to the hospital, where he had emergency surgery to stop the internal bleeding that was taking place and to replace his aorta. Unfortunately, this was not enough to save him, and Brandon Lee passed away on March 31st, 1993, at only 28 years old. How did this happen? Everything seemed to have gone perfectly fine. Upon initial inspection, nothing looked like it had been done incorrectly. However, the prop master David Kuttner confessed in a sea of tears that he never cleaned the gun. He shared that he gave the gun 2 weeks ago to second unit to shoot a close-up. After they were done with it, Kuttner put it directly in his truck and left it untouched until this day. He never inspected it or cleaned it during that time. Incompetence is putting it extremely mildly. This was not an experienced prop master, but the people that hired him were well aware of his qualifications or lack thereof when they hired him. A detective on the case said, quote, "He really didn't know what he was doing when it came to the gun. In one interview, we showed him a photograph of a gun, in fact, the gun that was used, and said, would he name the part of the gun? He points to that part of the gun, and he had no idea what we were talking about," unquote. So it comes as no surprise that the gun was not checked or cleaned. A lead tip was lodged in the barrel during the second unit close-up. The real gun was used during rehearsals, but as I mentioned, there was no blank, which meant no force to dislodge the tip. Then to film the scene, the blank was put in the chamber. Remember, this was the most powerful blank possible, with the same power behind it as a real bullet. This caused the bullet tip to explode.
The cap's gone off, no gunpowder, but what we'll be able to prove is the hung round inside the barrel. Inside that barrel, we have the obstruction. But if you look down the barrel, you'll notice that there's no light coming through. So that would tell me that there's an obstruction. In this case, a lead round, a hollow point. That's the one thing they didn't do. They didn't check the barrel for an obstruction. Problem with that is when you put a blank in there, then after whatever's in there, be it rock, dirt, or a hung round, that round comes out flying at 3,000 to 5,000 PSI.
The lab at State Bureau Investigations Department in Raleigh, North Carolina, tested and proved this theory correct. A quarter-load blank did not move the obstruction. There was simply not enough force behind it. But that fully charged blank pushed the obstruction through and went through a gelatin pack, which is the equivalent to a human body. I watched a Forensic Files episode on this, and the story was slightly different. It got kind of confusing.
They needed items from an actual pawn shop, so I went to one of the local pawn shops in Wilmington.
The stagehand gathered hundreds of props. Among them was a box of live .44 Magnum bullets.
Placed the 44 rounds on a counter that was used in the scene. The stunt coordinator said when he found the live ammunition on the set, he was livid. The bottom line rule is that you don't have live ammunition on the set.
The stunt coordinator locked the bullets in the trunk of his car, where they would remain for another 2 weeks. To save time, the live shells were brought out to be modified into blanks.
They removed the lead tip with a pair of pliers, shook out the powder that was inside of it. That left the cartridge and the primer. The primer in itself, they decided, was the equivalent of a quarter-load manufactured blank.
The end result was a handful of empty casings, each with a live primer.
And while they were making the quarter-load blanks, they realized they needed some dummy bullets also. A dummy round is basically a bullet with no powder, no primer, just a casing and a lead tip. No way it could be fired.
They fired off some of the primers from the blanks that they made and took those casings and put the lead tips back in the casings. But what they didn't do was check the primers to see if they'd all been fired when they made the dummy rounds. So they got some mixed up. So they made at least one dummy round that had a primer still intact. About 2 weeks after the second unit filmed the gun, the scene came up. It was a death scene for Brandon's character. And for this scene, the director chose to use a full-load blank.
They called for the .44 Magnum, loaded it with the full charge blanks. At this time, the lead tip is still lodged inside the barrel.
How it happened may be a bit foggy, but the result, the lead tip being stuck in the barrel, is the common thread among the explanations. No charges were ever brought against any of the crew members. Brandon's death was also investigated by the North Carolina Occupational Safety and Health Administration. They decided to fine Crowvision $84,000, the largest fee ever levied in the administration's history. However, Crowvision appealed the fine and got it reduced to $55,000. Brandon's mom, Linda Lee Caldwell, also settled a civil lawsuit for a confidential but substantial amount. Brandon's mother and fiance were asked about their feelings on finishing the film, and they gave their blessing if that's what the cast and crew wanted to do. which they did. I think that was what Brandon would have wanted. He was so proud of this film, and it was just about complete. Brandon's stunt double was used to finish out the film. They made him a mask that was basically a mold of Brandon's face, which spooked everybody, including the stunt person. Understandably so. The film also had rewrites, including the exclusion of a major character, Skull Cowboy. Instead of one-on-one dialogue, they went with montages and artsy shots. There was quite a bit of innovation used to put the broken pieces together, but everyone involved with the film was dedicated to ensuring its completion in honor of Brandon Lee. They were ultimately successful, but the legacy of the film has been more focused on the accidents that happened during the production of the film. All of these horrific events have led many to believe that this film is cursed. More specifically, they believe it's connected to the alleged Lee family curse. I am going to go into detail about this Lee family curse, because it is connected to the Curse of the Crow, but it's also just super riveting. I was absolutely enthralled learning about it. I will say I typically lean more towards skepticism with this kind of stuff, but the parallels, they're really freaky. Truly some very eerie coincidences, and I'm gonna start with the 1993 film, Dragon: The Bruce Lee Story. In it, the character Bruce Lee is up against this demon, a metaphorical demon, that has haunted him since his birth. At the end of the film, the demon turns his focus to Bruce's son, Brandon. The film released on May 7th, 1993. And again, Brandon Lee died on March 31st, 1993. Apparently, this Dragon film did not have the easiest production either. There were heart attacks, a monsoon that gave Hong Kong the heaviest rainfall in decades, and an extortion attempt by the Triad because they were working on the gang's territory. I could not find any official wrap date for the film, and I know you might be thinking May 7th is after March 31st, which yes, but you have to take into account that this was a 4-week difference. And in 1993, I mean even today, really, it is highly unlikely that this film added this eerie moment in at the very last minute for shock and awe. The director of the film, Rob Cohen, said the scene is one of the eeriest moments in the film, and after Brandon's death, it gave him great pause to think and still haunts him. He did reach out to Brandon's mother to make sure she was okay with him releasing this, asking if she wanted him to postpone it. She said absolutely not, and requested that it just be dedicated to his memory. This wasn't a random curse dubbed on the Lee family by onlookers. No. Bruce Lee's parents even believed their family was cursed or haunted by a demon as well. They lost their first son, and when they had Bruce, they were terrified the demon would get him too. So they referred to him as a little girl to trick the evil spirit or demon, whatever they thought it was. This more than likely severely affected his upbringing. Could you imagine being a child and your parents, your caregivers, the end-all be-all to a child, has led you to believe a demon is after you? That is terrifying. And feeling like you need to hide your identity in any way to stay safe as a kid? Adults go to therapy for far less. Unsurprisingly, adult Bruce 100% believed in the curse. He even claimed to have premonitions of his death, and didn't believe he would live even half as long as his father, and believed his son would die young as well. Bruce's father died at age 64, Bruce passed at the age of 32, and Brandon was 28. If Bruce really had those premonitions, that's very unsettling. Speaking of unsettling, the most peculiar and disturbing parallel I found is not based off of hearsay. It's not some urban legend. It's a provable and definite parallel that we can and have witnessed with our own eyes. Bruce Lee had a film titled Game of Death. And in this film, Bruce Lee's character, Billy Lowe, who is an actor in a movie, is filming an action sequence. I hope I don't make this too confusing. This is a film within a film. And this scene within a scene is supposed to show a typical movie shoot with a prop gun. But things take a dark turn when the prop gun, which has been tampered with, fires real bullets instead of blanks. And Billy Lowe gets shot for real. And if that wasn't bizarre enough, Bruce Lee never got to finish this film because he passed away before its completion, just like his son Brandon.
Passed away, and then the movie was released after he passed away. There was all kind of conspiracy theories. People thought the triads, the mafia, had something to do with it. It was said that his family had a curse, his father had a curse, that he passed on to Brandon. And what is your belief on how he passed away?
Well, what's the story in the West? I don't know.
No, you don't know the story in the West? That there was...
How Bruce Lee died?
It was a couple. Yeah. They said because of his success in the film industry and taking the martial arts around the world, that he upsetted the triads, mafia organization.
No.
Okay, that wasn't true. The other said that he was fighting a curse that was... No, that's not true.
Not true.
So
that news in the public. I think in the old days, 30 years ago, because the communication not that fast enough.
Yeah.
There's no internet. Nobody knows. He died in somebody's house. Yeah, that's everybody knows. He died in somebody's house. My boss go to pick him up, then send him to the hospital. That's the true thing.
That's the true thing.
Of course, you can find out more. I don't want to say in detail.
Yeah.
You find out the detail yourself. Yes.
Okay.
That's in the public in Hong Kong. Google. Yeah, everybody knows what happened. It's whenever I travel around, Bruce Lee died by somebody murder. No. Curse. No, nothing. Just normal. Die in somebody's house, that's all.
Several conspiracy theories have emerged about Bruce Lee's death because the way he passed away was quite odd. And it absolutely could and does, for many people, look suspicious. After complaining about a headache, he was given a painkiller by a friend and decided to lay down. Bruce then fell asleep and never woke up. His official cause of death was acute cerebral edema, or brain swelling, which was caused by an allergic reaction to the painkiller, Equagesic, a drug that was discontinued in the United States because of its possible toxic effects. When I was looking into this drug to see what it contained and how it could have caused an allergic reaction, I came across something very interesting. Recently, a bunch of letters written by Bruce Lee were found at a flea market. At first, it was a bit of an eye roll for me, but these have been authenticated and auctioned off for like $1 gazillion, by the way. The letters revealed that Bruce was being supplied drugs in secret for several years. In one letter, Lee said to his friend and supplier, Robert Baker, "I was throwing stones like hell, but I am working on the next character. Some coke will help," indicating he had become somewhat dependent on the substance, seemingly to deal with his work. Other drugs mentioned in the letters were hash or grass, acid, and mushrooms. As I said, this was very fascinating to learn about, but this was the 60s and 70s. Bruce Lee was a rich superstar. I would be more surprised if Bruce Lee did not partake in these specific drugs. Psychedelic drugs at this time were incredibly popular. Could his usage have something to do with his death? It's impossible to say for certain, but maybe? In my 1000% unprofessional opinion, most likely not. Others say that Lee was killed by Hong Kong triads, that or mainland Chinese gangs, because his stardom was threatening the dominance of Mandarin language films that they had investments in. So the theory is Bruce Lee was killed to ensure that their investments were secure. Another theory is that he was murdered for revealing martial arts secrets to the Western world. Bruce Lee was teaching Kung Fu to non-Chinese students, and promoting a more open and eclectic approach to martial arts through his own philosophy. This deeply upset traditionalists in the martial arts community and was looked at as a major betrayal of culture. Then there is the theory that Bruce was poisoned by a jealous lover. Now, I do believe Bruce was found at a lady friend's house, a lady friend that was not his wife. I don't personally believe that is the cause of his death, but this was nutso. People lost their fucking minds over this theory. There was a bomb threat, a faux bomb threat, but still a bomb threat, called into police. It was a suspicious brown paper bag covered in Chinese writing that said Betty Ting, the lady friend, knows the cause of Bruce Lee's death. There were a few more fake bomb threats with similar messages written on them like revenge for Bruce, and there was a demonstration in Kuala Lumpur where people held up signs that said Betty killed Bruce. Absolute insanity. I found a very compelling theory in the book Bruce Lee, A Life by Matthew Pauly. In it, he shared that Bruce Lee had his sweat glands removed to look better on film. I immediately thought, this is horseshit. It's fucking sweat glands. Are we serious now? You can't remove sweat glands. Who would remove their sweat glands? But HistoryChannel.com did confirm that Bruce Lee removed the sweat glands from his armpits to look better on film. This reduced his body's ability to dissipate heat. 10 weeks before he died, he was doing some re-recordings in a studio for a film he was working on. And it was a small room, and they, of course, had to turn the AC off so there wasn't any crazy background noise. About 30 minutes later, the room became a sauna, and Bruce Lee fainted and began convulsing. He was rushed to the hospital and nearly died from brain swelling. Fortunately, this time it was caught and treated just early enough. One major important detail I found was that the day Bruce died, July 20th, 1973, was one of the hottest days that summer in Hong Kong. Remember, Bruce took that painkiller before he died to aid a terrible headache. Headaches are a common symptom of hyperthermia. A headache could be a symptom of pretty much anything, but I did feel like that was important to share. There are many layers to this curse of the crow. I think there are some very strange, creepy, eerie parallels, and I'm inclined to believe that there was some sort of dark energy blanketing that set. The bad vibes were very clear and very apparent, and maybe that's what manifested a curse. A lot of the tragedy surrounding the crow is shrouded in this supernatural speculation. I'm a bit torn here as a skeptic. On one hand, I think the curse of the crow is incompetence. The reality for a lot of the accidents, if not all of the accidents, lies in the realm of human error and poor decision-making by those in authority positions. The cast and crew worked their asses off, and their dedication should be honored. All of that being said, I cannot erase those creepy parallels from my mind. Brandon Lee's tragic fate mirroring his father's character's demise, and the unsettling demon moment in Dragon, the Bruce Lee story, all of that is so bizarre. Who knows? Perhaps there are two curses riding alongside one another. One curse being human greed, because at the end of the day, that's what caused corners to be cut on this film, which was incredibly dangerous. And the other curse being something more inexplicable. Maybe it's just easier to chalk this one up to supernatural entities, something far less terrifying than greedy humans, and the idea that unintelligible tragedies can happen anywhere, at any time, to any one of us.